Hi, Travis. Welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, you've written one book, and you told me in the pre-chat you're working on another book, and we're going to get to that because that's what this show is about, of course. You're going to tell me all about that book you've written. But before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your backstory, who you are, and how come you write books?
Oh, John, it's a labor of love to be sure, but it's a long journey to get where I actually wrote a book. As anyone can read in my author bio and see in my book, is like I came from a very small town in Central Florida, where from the moment I took my first breath and came out of the womb, I decided it just wasn't for me, and I tried to get away. And it took me a while to do that. Going through college and trying to find myself. It was one of those things where I joined the army at a young age, just trying to get that adventure, being the young man with a wanderlust and get out of town. And what I found out was it was a lot more hoping for something and a lot less doing something. I ended up in not so far away exotic places, but government buildings and desolate landscapes in the United States that were not the adventure I'd hoped for. And in that time, I had a mind that just wouldn't rest. And I found myself spending more and more time daydreaming, less and less time doing my job. So finally, after COVID, when I came off of active duty, I had a friend who's like, "Hey, you've got some good stuff here. Maybe you should write a story." So I'd kick the idea around, and before I knew it, I had a sentence that led to a paragraph that led to a
Mm.
chapter, and a chapter that led to a book.
I didn't have a chance to take a close look at your book. Is it fiction?
It is fiction. The kernel of truth there is I did have a brother who did pass away, and it was one of those motivating factors of life is a fickle thing. You might as well get after it because you don't know how long you're going to be here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get into the guts of your book. What's it all about? And do you have a message that you want to get out there?
Well, so I went home for the funeral, and as funerals are, they're never comfortable, especially when it's someone that close. But I had the chance to see in the town we come from. There's really only one funeral, and the same guy who's the funeral director has buried as many of my family as anybody else. And I had a chance to be there before, and there was a family that was having a hell of a time. They were having quite the. I thought to myself, what would it be like if ours went that way? If it just everyone went nuts, if everyone was crying, if everyone was jumping, and it really made my mind start racing in that direction of what ifs. But at the same time, uh, processing grief and dealing with things is an important part of life. And I started to journal about it. And before I knew it, that's where the sentence led to the paragraph. And a friend of mine had introduced me to, excuse me, Ram Dass and Alan Watts. And before I knew it, I had gone down this rabbit hole of Zen Buddhism and everything in between. But it made me think. And finally, as I was writing the story, I had made up my mind that I want it to be a story about finding yourself through the choices that we end up making in life, all while we've suffered this loss, and how we just cling to hope, trying to make our way through it.
Hmm. The book's called The Home I Left. What do you mean by home? Literally the home you left, or are you looking at a bigger picture there?
And it's kind of both, really. When I left home, I was 22 years old, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, going out into the world. It is all I'd ever known. I
Mm.
was away from home for probably 2 or 3 years, always traveling, always doing army stuff, always doing work. And I came home for the first time in a while, and I couldn't go home again. The town wasn't the same. The people I knew were either weren't there or weren't how I remembered them.
Yeah.
My parents didn't seem like these all powerful figures that knew all the answers anymore. My
Mm.
friends didn't seem like these cool guys that, had the world by the tail. It was just like being on another planet, but
Yeah.
I was home.
Very interesting. I
Yeah.
think that's more common than people think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you decided to write a fictional story about these feelings that you have. Your characters then represent a lot of your thoughts, I take it.
For sure. And I do get that question, but one of the many reasons I tell people, that it is a fiction on top of the story being made up is I could never be as brave as the main character. He definitely was a vessel for me to vent frustration and vent emotions. With the choices that he makes in the book, I don't know if I could be as brave.
And that's usually the case.
Yeah,
Yeah, I talked to plenty of authors who express similar feelings about their characters.
yeah,
So with a fiction, I guess you could exaggerate too, as long as it's plausible and realistic, and your character could be what maybe you hope to be, but you can't really be that.
yeah. I would definitely go down that hole. I mean, the characters are caricatures in the sense that it's an extreme representation of things,
Mhm.
whether it be extremely good or extremely bad. But it's in shaping those things, I was asking myself, if the worst thing that happened while I was home was, what would it be? If the best thing that happened while I was home, what would it be? If I
Mhm.
were to interact with the character that I'm writing, what would I want them to say to me if I was in that state of mind? What would be
Right.
the worst thing they could say to me?
Yeah. 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 Because you have to build conflict. I mean, if you're going to make the story interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I took a creative writing course in college, and I got in there by mistake. It was all girls in the class. I was the only boy. It was an English honors class,
Hmm.
and I have to wait till the end of the class and I tell the professor, like, I think there's been a mistake. I am not an English major guy. I have a hard time writing my name in a straight line. I don't think I should be here. He's like, listen, it's like, just give it a week. He's like, you can drop the class, try it for a week and see what happens. Right? He's like, I think you've got real potential. Now, later on, I found out you have to have at least 12 students in a class to make a class. So he wanted me to stay there. But going through that and learning those things, it's exactly what you talked about. It's just carving out something in your mind that makes sense.
You have more than one character in your book, I take it. You have several characters. Perhaps some of them are women or people nothing like you. How do you um, how do you project yourself into those characters and make them plausible?
Well, it's I'm a big pushover. I'm a softie. I know I am. So I try to keep that tenderness in there for sure. But at the same time, I try to imagine maybe if I wasn't so nice, how would I enact in this situation? All these inhibitions that I have that are holding me back. How do I get to a point where I can see what it would look like if I didn't have them?
Hmm. And where does your book take place?
So it actually takes place in my small hometown. It's a small town called Zephyr Hills, Florida, which
Hmm.
is a funny name for anybody that knows English language. Zephyr is a hill, so basically the town's name is Hill Hills, and it's a small town in Central Florida. It was going to be gobbled up by Tampa before too long, but yeah, it's just when I was a kid, it was the middle of nowhere. The biggest treat was driving into Tampa. It was like a 45 minute to hour drive. You'd see the one skyscraper we had, and you thought you were in the middle of New York City.
What do you do now?
So now I'm giving this writing thing a go.
Okay.
I finished my master's degree. I'm riding the high from that, and I'm trying to be a full time author.
Okay. And when was The Home I Left published?
So it came out in October of last year, 2023.
Are you self-published or did you use a hybrid publisher?
So I am self published. I had to, speaking of getting out of college, I had to go back to school again to learn this whole writing and publishing thing for sure. And I just thought it was the best case scenario to get my stuff out there, without having to go through. Because once I found out the publishing process of you got to prove yourself to a literary agent, then you got to prove yourself to a publisher, and then if you pass those pearly gates, what they want to publish is maybe a half or a third of what you wrote, and the rest of it's what they thought was good.
Yeah, I guess that's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, after you finish writing the book and you did all the work that you needed to do, what
Mm.
have you done to promote it?
So you find me, excuse me, you find me on social media on Instagram and on Twitter. You are my fourth podcast so far, and I have gone down the Facebook promotions, the written word media promotions, and of course the Amazon Plus promotions.
A lot of work, isn't it?
It is an incredible amount of work. It is, but I will take this over a dark cubicle in a terrible office building working for the government any day of the week.
Yeah. Well, different income streams for younger people is the essential way to move forward. I don't think there's any other way. You can't follow my footsteps. I think that world is gone.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. The world is changing.
Yeah.
I, I want to. I kind of noted in my book is like I tell people all the time. This is not a sad story. A lot of people tell me I think it's a story of great hope, like I see nowadays. I don't think we're in the end times. I don't think the world is all going to hell in a handbasket. I think that things are changing, and that's wonderful because we have incredible opportunities for things that no human being that has ever lived before us could ever conceive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, getting back to the idea of having to work so hard to promote your first book, and you told me in the pre-chat you're working on a second book. Is that interfering in any way? Because now you have to split your work into promoting your first book and somehow write your second book. How does that work?
It doesn't interfere necessarily. I have good organizational skills that I did learn from my time in. So sleep is something we don't need as much as we think we do. But my days are broken around. I wake up in the morning, and my mornings are spent promoting the book and getting the message out there, and trying to find other great people like you to come on the show who let me spread my message. And then every day I write. Monday through Friday, I have to write. I can write optionally on the weekends. I had a wonderful professor who taught poetry at my university, and I told her years ago when I was trying to write an assignment, I had a hard time sitting and write it. And she said, "Look," she's like, "You like Ernest Hemingway, don't you?" And I said, "I do. I think he's a good writer." She said, "Do you know that every day he would wake up, whether he was drunk, hungover, got bloodied from a bar fight, he would write a minimum of 500 words a day?" I said, "I didn't know that." She's like, "Use that as a starting point." And the second thing she told me was, "Always stop when the writing is good." And I didn't really understand that at the time because that was also one of Hemingway's techniques. Don't write a full conclusion of an idea. If you feel you've got an idea coming and you can really feel it going, don't write it all the way through. Get about 70% through. Write a good portion of it. Leave something left on the paper so you can come back to it later.
Hmm.
So that's how I have to structure my days.
Very good.
Uh, if everything works out, I hit about 1,000 words a day.
Okay. That's really good advice.
Yeah,
Not people who watch this are generally writers themselves, and you may have
yeah,
just inspired someone to do just that.
I hope so.
You mentioned Alan Watts. Now,
Yeah,
I was introduced to Alan Watts through a book called The Way of
mm,
Zen, I think it's called, and I was 17 years old, and it affected me. And I really enjoy his form of entertainment. He does call himself an entertainer. Oh, well, he did. He's passed away.
yeah.
Um, how how close did you get to that way of thinking?
I want to say decently close. It was the first time in my life when I was writing the book that I really had to confront mortality and actually see it. And when you're up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you had a bottle of wine and you're trying to write a story and you have this well spoken English gentleman tell you about the way of Zen and to not focus on anything because what is will be and what was won't be. And that all that matters in the universe is the here and the now. But that doesn't even matter because it's already been decided. Hearing these ideas and listening to them, thinking about not pressuring yourself to think about things because it's the way of how it will go. But at the same time, we're a collective consciousness of beings spread across through multiple incarnations, and we make one collective consciousness, and we are God. That will mess with your brain when you're writing a book for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm very grateful that I found him and I've read his stuff and I've listened to him because it hasn't brought me peace. If anything, it's brought me greater fear and emotional turmoil, but it can bring me greater peace as I spend time trying to understand what he taught and what he understood and what he saw.
Well, just hold on to that because you'll need it for the rest of your life.
It might take me that long.
It does.
Mm,
Now let's go back to your first book, the one that's published last year in 2023. How many
mm.
pages is it?
The total book is 249 pages, but if you take out the title page and everything, it's about 240 pages.
Right. What was it
Mm,
like sending that to an editor, which I imagine you hired an editor to take care of that?
yes, it was wow. It was a beast, and at the time my focus was so I'd handwritten it. I had a journal I had bought when I was back home, and I just kind of started putting the ideas in, and it got to the point where I'd written so much I didn't want to start typing it yet because I wanted to finish it through. And I found that it's easier to take a notebook into a bar or a restaurant or wherever you're at where an idea comes to you. I'm very big on always having paper on me.
Hmm.
So I hand wrote it and then I had to type it up. I had a friend of mine type it up and it ended up being a run on sentence. It was like one giant run on sentence. And I had to turn this into an editor and he had to decipher this giant run on sentence, which God bless the man. He did. he was able to turn it into a surprisingly coherent 200 plus pages.
Cool.
But I will tell anybody that writes, when you write your book and you send it to an editor, you cannot say, I've written it, it's done, I don't want to read it anymore, I just want to publish it. That's not how this is going to work. You're going to read that book another dozen times.
Yep.
You're going to have to, from cover to cover, because he or she is going to offer input. They're not going to just make changes, especially if you're paying. They're going to offer input and how they think the story should be shaped, and how things should be written. And you can go in and click accept all, but then you've just defeated the purpose of an author or editor. So yeah, you're going to have to read your own writing many, many, many times before you finally publish it.
Right. And when you're reading your own writing, and it comes back from the editor with these suggestions, are the suggestions baked right into the writing so you can see how it flows?
Yeah, so absolutely, they do it in a Word document where the words or the suggestions he makes is underlined and bolded or red or whatever he
Right.
or she picks, and you can read it through, and he'll cross out or she'll cross out what they don't think should be in there, and you can check mark agree or X mark disagree.
Right. And how long did
Yeah,
that process take?
that took about a month. I had
Constant
been
work.
traveling at the time, yeah, and I had to get to the hotel, and I had to open up the Wi-Fi, and I had to get his edits, my edits, way to go back and forth. Yeah, it was a lot of work.
Yeah. So all this work, what's it yielding for you? It's been what, maybe about 5 or 6 months since it's
Mhm.
been out. What's sales like for you?
Sales are okay. They ebb and flow, honestly, because it's a new book. And the hardest part about being a self-published author is, getting your work out there because it's a drop in an ocean. The
Yeah.
same professor I told you about, he told me when it comes to published works, if you go to Barnes and Noble or you go to a bookstore and you see all the books that line all the walls, he's like, that's less than 1% of all books that are ever published. He's like, that's how hard it is to get into the market. But I'm okay with it because I have greater control and there's more that I can see. And I'm learning a lot along the way. Like, obviously, it's cost me a few dollars, but I don't regret spending any of the money because I've learned now the majority of these things I can do myself.
Hmm.
But I would say also for anybody who wants to go the traditional published route, like we said earlier, on top of everything we talked about with the editing process and having to go through the gatekeepers, I didn't know. I have a writing mentor who I listened to, a couple of ladies who published quite a few books, and they helped me. When you go to see a traditional publisher, they will actually their marketing, the cost of their marketing, they will deduct from your royalties. That's the
Yeah.
cost of business there. I was like, wow,
Sure.
really? So it is what you prefer. If you've got a really good story and people like it and you want to take it, like go for it. Me personally, I'm a pro freedom guy.
Yeah,
I really like the freedom of choice to make my own decisions.
for sure.
If I fail, I fail. At least I learned something from it and I have that
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm. How far ahead are you now in your second book?
So I am about halfway through on my second book.
Okay.
I think I'm at the 70-page mark, going
Okay.
strong.
And that's also fiction?
So this will actually be a nonfiction.
All right.
A friend of mine had really encouraged me from all of my experiences working for the government and the military to write this book. And it definitely came out of COVID as well, where we really started to question the people in charge and like how smart are they, right? Like how good are they, what they do. So for my book, the working title is The Unconventionals. I'll look to have it out in probably June, July timeframe. Also, will be self-published on Amazon. I have four generals that I'm looking at across history and across cultures who are unconventional people. And when I say that, they don't meet the societal norms and expectations of the institutions or their countries of what a successful person should be. They break all the barriers, they break all the standards, and they are incredibly successful because of
When you have that book
it. Mm,
done, please contact me. I'll have you on as a guest and we can talk about that in depth. It sounds fascinating.
I'd love to. I really
And
would.
now, do you have a website?
So I don't have a website yet. That is a work in progress. That will be up and running soon. That is something a lot of authors have encouraged me to do.
Okay.
You can find me on Instagram at Seth Bush1 and then on Twitter at Seth Bush17, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah,
And Seth is your middle name, I take it. I see the initial S.
it is. It is my middle name.
Okay, you go by Travis Bush.
I do professionally, yes.
Okay.
Seth, I save for the close friends.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, it's quite the business, I know.
Yeah.
Well, any final words before we wrap it up?
I would end it by going back to my story of my book one final time. For those who do get a chance to read it, Yes, there are sad parts of the story, but it is a book of great hope, I believe. And the key takeaway I would like anyone to take from the characters in the story: there are no heroes and there are no villains. It's just people being people in the worst scenario they could imagine. And I think that's something we should all take from it. At the end of the day, no matter how bad or good things are, we're all just people.
Hmm. It's a book of hope.
Book of hope.
You're like me, happily ever after guy.
I hope so. Well, maybe I'll keep this for a while longer.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you all the success moving forward in your new career.
Thanks, John. I really do appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again.
You take care now.
You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You can also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.